Hi, I'm Kara Fravor. I'm the Business Services Director at the National Young Farmers Coalition. Welcome. Today we're doing a webinar on the Farm to School program. So this is the first of two webinars we're doing. This one's sort of basics about the Farm to School program, and I'm just going to give a little overview of the National Young Farmers Coalition and who we are, and then I'm going to hand it over to Tegan and Jenna from USDA's Office of Community Food Systems, which houses the National Farm to School program. So the National Young Farmers Coalition, we are an organization started in 2010 by 3 young farmers who are facing some challenges that would be familiar to young farmers around the country now, right? Issues specifically around land access. And that we started then and have grown rapidly since over the last 7 years. We have kind of a threefold approach. The first is through policy change. So we do policy change at the federal and the state level. Some examples of that are like advocating for improvements to USDA programs, advocating for increases in funding for farmland conservation projects, working certainly to ensure that the Farm Bill fortifies opportunities and programs for young farmers around the country. So those are some examples of the kind of policy work that we're doing. In addition to that, sort of federal work, we have local chapters around the country. We have 41 chapters in 29 states. You should look up and see if there's one near you if you don't already know. And if you don't have a local chapter and want to, certainly contact us. Our chapters are also doing policy work, both with us and on a chapter level. They're definitely doing work to change state programs that could help their members, and then at the local level through FSA committees or serving on their conservation districts or in their water boards. These chapters are also, they're facilitating friendships and business partnerships too, through social activities and collaborative buying or skill sharing workshops, farm tours, stuff like that. So this is a great way to be involved with the local farming community and find friends who are working on similar things that you might be working on, and also to just kind of have a stronger voice as a larger network. So that's how our chapters work. And then we have a business services arm, and that's the work that I do. Well, we all do it, but that I sort of focus on, and that's sort of where this webinar fits in. I sometimes describe our business services as helping farmers to navigate federal opportunities and regulations that can impact their businesses. So some examples of that are some work on farm service agency loans. You can see the cover of a guidebook we recently put together here. We did trainings and this written guidebook about that. We do some work around food safety, specifically around FSMA's produce safety rule. We do some work around crop insurance, trying to understand ways that some crop insurance programs can help young farmers, and ways that those can be edited to serve diversified and smaller growers better. And then we have workshops about, or we have guidebooks about organic certification. We have guidebooks around land access and some great land access tools. We're working on a customer relations manager. And then we have these amazing discounts, membership discounts at agricultural companies around the US. There are like 20 or more of those discounts available. That's not why you should join NYFC. You should join because we do really cool work, but those discounts are also really awesome. They're everything from seeds to fencing equipment to boots to walk behind tillers. So all kinds of cool stuff. And this webinar kind of fits into business services pretty directly. So in the last year, we did a national survey of young farmers around the country. And this is a little screenshot from that, looking at what were we looked at all kinds of information. You should check that out. But one of the questions in that survey was sort of, how are you marketing? And we can see that young farmers around the country are really marketing directly. They're selling their crops often directly. So maybe through community supported agriculture, through farmers markets, selling directly to restaurants. And a much smaller portion of them were really depending heavily on selling to institutions. That's not to say that somebody might not sell a little bit of their produce or grain or meat institutionally, but we don't see a lot of young farmers making that their largest marketing method or marketing strategy. But we also hear lots of young people asking questions about these programs. How do you sell to schools? How do you sell into a university system or through an institution like that? And especially with Farm to School, because there's some grants available, people have lots of questions about how that works. And it's a federal program, so it can be a little bit confusing, and selling to institutions can be a bit confusing. So when Tegan from USDA's Office of Community Food Systems reached out and said that they were interested in working with us to put on a webinar, I thought, oh, there'll be lots of farmers who are interested in that as well. And indeed, there have been. We've had great responses. So there's lots of you out there watching this now. So that's kind of why we're working on this. We can cover some housekeeping details here, and then I'll hand it over to Tegan and Jenna from USDA's Office of Community Food Systems and their Farm to School program.
Okay, great. Thank you for that great introduction, Kara. This is our first time using the platform, so we are getting used to it, but I think it's going to work well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our whole team is really excited here at the USDA. This is our first time doing a webinar, our team's first time doing a webinar specifically for farmers, and we were really delighted to see how there was such interest. I think that this was a sold out webinar, so we're super delighted. This is Farm to School 101, as Kara mentioned. I'm Tegan Bernstein, and I'll be co-presenting with my colleague Jenna Siegel. We are USDA Farm to School regional leads, and I'll get in what a regional lead is a little bit later in the presentation. I'll give you a very brief background. I'm based in Philadelphia. I cover the Mid-Atlantic region, which goes as far south as, well, it's a little complex, as far south as Virginia, but I also include Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in my reach, and as far north as New Jersey. I've been working with farmers as well as with schools and basically in a community food system setting for 15 years, and I've been with the USDA for 4 years. I have presented at quite a few producer conferences, but as I mentioned, it's our first time doing a webinar, and we're both really excited about that. And I'm gonna let Jenna introduce herself briefly before we get started as well. Go ahead, Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. As Tegan mentioned, I'm the Farm to School regional lead as well. And I'm based in Chicago, and I'm the Farm to School regional lead for the Midwest region. So basically, the states go around from Minnesota all the way around to Michigan. And I, similar to Tegan, have been active in Farm to School, having worked on farms internationally as well as nationally to really connect farmers to schools and help really support community food systems efforts as well. For over 10 years now as well. And I've been in this role for just under 2 years. So I don't want to tell too much more about my personal background since we have lots to cover today. And this is just part one of a 2-part webinar series. So we're really excited to just share, kind of start scratching the surface on what Farm to School means and give you the tools that you need to start considering whether or not it works for you.
Thanks, Jenna. So without further ado, we'll move forward with the agenda. So essentially today we're going to speak briefly about our office and what the USDA Farm to School program is. We're then going to go into what are called child nutrition programs, or CNPs, just to make sure everyone is really clear with those. We're going to identify some other areas besides selling to schools, different ways that you can intersect with your community or in a school setting besides direct sales. Help you learn a little bit about what the customer is, who that is, and how to approach them. And then we're definitely going to touch on our USDA Farm to School grant program, as well as some other funding opportunities. We absolutely want to make sure at the end of this webinar that you know, and I'll start at the bottom first, that you're eligible to apply for USDA Farm to School grants. And then hopefully you'll have an idea about whether or not direct sales to schools is something you want to start to work into your business plan. Okay, so a little bit about our team. As I mentioned, we are the Office of Community Food Systems. We have a team of national staff, these 5 individuals here who are based in DC. And then you have a regional lead located in every USDA region. We are aligned with the USDA regional offices. And here are little floating faces. So I'm in the little blue area there, and Jenna is floating up top. But there, as you can see, there's an individual, no matter where you're located, that you can absolutely reach out to answer questions after this webinar, and we hope that you do. I also just wanted to touch on, we are based in the Office of Community Food Systems, which sits inside of Food and Nutrition Service. So it is the department inside of the USDA that houses all child nutrition programs, all feeding programs. And it's a little unique. So this isn't necessarily an official definition, but this is our working definition. And what we mean when we say community food system is a food system where all of the production, distribution, consumption, and processing happen in one geographic location, and essentially that that consumption benefits the economy and the social and nutritional health of a particular community. Another simplified way of saying this is that a community food system is defined by that community. And I know that many of you are familiar with a similar term. I just wanted to share this. This is a little infographic that our office has developed that we are sharing as we've been getting this question more and more. Okay, so now that you've heard a little bit about us, we want to know a little bit about you, and I'm going to turn things over to Jenna to run this poll. So I'll put myself on mute and let her run this.
Great, thanks, Tegan. So like Tegan said, we want to know a little bit about who you are. So we're going to try out this whole raising your hand option, see if we can get some feedback from you. So using the raise your hand function, how many of you are farmers? Great, we see some hands being raised. Wonderful. So it looks like, according to the hands up, everyone's slowly getting their afternoon exercise, slowly putting up your hands. So it looks like a few of you are farmers. I'm assuming some of you maybe don't have access to the function as well. How about, you can leave your hands up for now, and how about, are you a farmer who is excited to start selling to schools? All right, so it looks like the same hands are up. I'll give another moment or two to see if anyone raises any more hands. Okay, how about you're a farmer who's already selling to schools? All right, not seeing too much change yet. Oh, looks like your hands have been put down. So if you want to raise your hand again, if you're currently selling to schools.
It looks like we have one experienced farmer in the group.
One experienced farmer, great, thanks, Kara. And then now, how about who on the line is a farmer who you're not really sure, you're kind of considering selling to schools, you don't really know what farm to school is, but you want to learn more? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Raise your hand. Oh, got a hand raised. Give you a couple more moments. All right, so it seems like maybe everyone's a little tired from long days working in the field today, or busy days. But what we're really excited is that maybe some of you by the end of this webinar will really get some of those skills and information you need to decide if you want to start selling to schools or have some of the tools to begin doing it. And again, as we mentioned, moving forward at our next webinar, you'll have opportunities to really understand some of those nuances and build those relationships. And a little bit of note too, we want to say that when we say farmer, we really refer to not just traditional farmers, we refer to fisher people, we refer to ranchers, so it's kind of everyone. So we just kind of broadly call you all farmers, but we're referring to all of you. Okay, so diving in a little more, moving forward, we want to give a little more context for our role and how the Office of Community Food Systems really came to be. So we administer the USDA's Farm to School program, which was established in the amended National School Lunch Act. Not only does our office support a farm to school grant program, but we also provide training and technical assistance, as well as conduct research on farm to school best practices. We provide up to $5 million annually in grant funding to farmers, school districts, state agencies, and communities, and also provide training and technical assistance in the form of fact sheets and webinars like this one, and also attend many conferences and provide a direct conduit to farmers and everyone interested in farm to school. We also really focus on research and data and try to share best practices nationally that can be useful to moving forward farm to school. And we primarily administer that through the farm to school census. And it's also important to note that this piece of legislation supports all child nutrition programs. So it's not just the National School Lunch Program or working with K-12 students. It really goes beyond that and talks about our farm to summer programs and child adult care food programs as well. And this is just really, it's not just a grant program, it's really more of that. And we wanted to really make that clear. So moving on to the census, maybe a quick show of hands if you can raise your hand if you've heard of the farm to school census. Trying to really make you engage. Great, wonderful. I see some hands up. So it looks like some of you have heard of the farm to school census. So we have already conducted the census twice, and we are seeing that demand is growing. We have another census coming out in 2019. So be sure to go to the website. We'll make sure to share that in the chat function, and we'll be popping up at the end as well. You can go to the census website and see where your local school district or your state stands. It is self-reported data, so school districts are able to respond and say whether or not they're participating in farm to school. In our last census, we saw that school districts reported spending over $790 million on local food alone. That was about a 70% response rate from those that we sent the census to. We also saw that school districts, 42% of those that respond to the census said they currently participate in farm to school activities and have over 7,000 school gardens across the country. So again, as I said, you can log on to, you can go to the census website and you can see, you can do it state by state, you can do it by school districts and see ways to connect to your local districts and see if they currently are buying from local farms and participating in farm to school. And with that, I will hand it back over to Tegan.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, as a lot of people think that I might be biased, but think that the census website's a little fun because you can kind of like hover your mouse over your state and you can go right down to the district near you. So feel free to explore that and reach out to your regional lead if you have any questions. So we're just gonna go right into sharing a little bit more about child nutrition programs, which ideally will help you really understand what the school food service market is. And so we're not going to get too far into terminology, but really, you know, when you're learning about a new market, you have to learn how to speak that market's language. And these are the basic, pretty much all of the child nutrition programs that we house, and we do use a lot of acronyms, so I've spelled them out for you here. So the National School Lunch Program, NSLP, and the School Breakfast Program are the primary two programs that take up not only the bulk of the funds, but are probably the ones that everyone is most familiar with. And really, most of the presentation will focus on these two programs. There also is an after-school snack program and a fresh fruit and vegetable program, FFVP, that is a snack as well that happens generally in the classroom. And a lot of farmers have found that that is a good entryway into selling to schools. There's Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, which funds pre-K and other feeding programs for daycares. And then there's also a summer food service program that can be something called Seamless Summer that districts can add on to their NSLP program, or it can be administered by a rec center or a nonprofit or a church. There's a lot of different types of institutions that run summer food service program. But again, like I mentioned, we're really going to be focusing on NSLP and the school breakfast program. So again, we don't want to get, too deep in the weeds here, but I do think that this context is helpful into really understanding how to approach the school food service market. So the National School Lunch Program officially started in 1946, and our most recent participation numbers, we know that there are over 30 million meals that are served every day. And this little diagram here shows the flow of funds. So the funds come from the USDA to the state agency. Normally it's the Department of Education, but sometimes it is the Department of Agriculture, depending upon how that's set up in your individual state. And then to the school, or what we call the SFA, which stands for the School Food Authority. These are general reimbursement rates down below for the school lunch program. So just for the school lunch program. So there are extra reimbursement rates for fresh fruit and vegetable, as well as the school breakfast and the other programs that I mentioned. And this is plus or minus 6 cents here or there, but it's around $3.29. If the student qualifies for a free lunch, it's around $2.89 if the student qualifies for a reduced price lunch. And even if the student doesn't qualify based upon their socioeconomic status for any reimbursement, that program is still paid money. They still receive a reimbursement. And right now it's around 40 cents. And I think that these numbers are important to put up there, essentially because it's important to know what kind of market you're approaching. And you can look at this and say, oh, that's not any money. How could a school afford to buy local produce? And we'll get into all of the ways that they can later, but essentially you are working with scale here. And the school food service market was a $16.7 billion market last year. So it is a huge market in the US, and I think that that isn't always shared just because of these reimbursement rates. I just wanted to stop here and see if there were any questions about this, because we do tend to get questions about reimbursement rates or how that works. No? Okay, you can always send them to Jenna. Oops, I already gave the answer to this, so we can just see who is listening. But here's here's the next poll here. So let's just see who is listening, and I'll let Jenna count up those hands because I can't see the hands here. But what was the total market for school lunch and school breakfast last year?
Was it A, 10.2 billion? Raise your hand if you think that's the answer. Not seeing any hands.
Have people voted?
B, 1.3 billion? Any takers?
Yes.
I hear a yes. Okay. How about 16.7 billion? Anyone raise your hand if you think that's? Oh, look at you. We've got 2 raised hands so far. Looks like some of you are listening. And yes, that's correct. As Tegan said, it is a significant market. And as we mentioned earlier with the census, nearly 800 million, that is local food alone. So you can imagine that this is a really big untapped market and lots of potential for all of you to start building those connections and making some sales in the school lunch market.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. All right, so now we're going to go into what do we mean by farm to school at the USDA. And essentially, there are a lot of different components. Like farm to school programs are defined, again, similar to a community food system, by the schools and communities that are stakeholders inside of that program. So the USDA, we're not coming out and saying there needs to be, one specific program that you do, and it's not farm to school. Essentially, farm to school programs can contain a wide variety of experiential nutrition and agriculture activities, combined with serving local food in a child nutrition program. So either one of these, so let's say that there are, taste tests happening in the classroom combined with farmer visits or field trips, or there's a really robust school garden program. And there might be some cool schools that start with just buying local apples for National Farm to School Month. We call either one of those a farm to school activity. And when you have both of those activities combined, meaning serving locally procured food that was grown, and again, a self-defined local area in a child nutrition program with that experiential education, that's a complete farm to school program. So you just really need those 2 components. And generally schools start in one place or the other and then work towards the other component for a full program. what does a farm to school lunch tray look like? And yes, this is a real lunch tray. It is not a lunch tray in every school, and I'm not trying to say that, but essentially with the same passage of the School Lunch Act in 2010 that established the USDA Farm to School program, it made some major changes, as I'm sure some of you are aware, to the child nutrition standards. So essentially, some of those changes were, instead of just serving a vegetable, you had to serve a variety of vegetables. You also had to serve both a fruit and a vegetable. The vegetables were broken up into subcategories. So you had to serve dark greens, you had to serve something from the orange category. And essentially what that meant is a lot more diversity on the school lunch plate. There also were some standards around serving legumes and whole grains, as well as there were calorie limits, and there were standards around the size of the meat that can be served. But really what this means is that schools started diversifying what they were purchasing. And a lot of schools found that participating in a farm to school program or starting to look for those things more locally was a great way to diversify that plate. I also want to share this plate to note that when we say farm to school, sometimes when we're presenting out places, people think that we mean fruits and vegetables, and absolutely we do mean fruits and vegetables, but we also mean the whole plate. So we also mean local meat and local dairy, local grains, local legumes, and we have examples of schools that are purchasing, you know, everything from local beef to local lentils. So I just, again, going back to kind of Jenna noting that when we say farmer, we don't just mean a diversified vegetable farmer, we mean, you know, any kind of producer really producing food. And farm to school is inclusive of all of that. All right, so why should you even consider selling to schools? So I hope no one is, you know, overwhelmed at this point, but it is a different market that does take a little bit of time to learn maybe a different approach from the markets that you might be more familiar with, like a farmer's market or selling to restaurants. So essentially it's a predictable, consistent revenue stream. You know, I've always said that any healthy community is always going to have schools and ideally always going to have farms in close proximity. So schools hopefully will always be there. You know, schools are, it's not like a restaurant which can be there 1 year and can close 2 years later. It also has a seasonality to it where, you know, schools generally need food. There are some schools that are year round, but they need the majority of their food and generally you're off season. So it can be a great opportunity to keep up your revenue and your sales when maybe the farmers markets have died down or maybe the restaurants, you know, aren't featuring some of those same items. It's an awesome marketing opportunity for your farm. It's really, there's no better way than getting, you know, parents excited about going to farmers markets and purchasing local produce and having their kids come home and be super psyched about their school lunch where they had a local sweet potato and they can't stop talking about it. You also know exactly where your food goes, and I know that's important to some people. It might not be always your driving opportunity, but when I was first doing this work, I heard that a lot from the farmers that I was working with, that, you know, they've lost that sense of connection, and I know that's why a lot of people do like to go to farmers markets, or they have a multiple markets and still go to one because they're satisfying to know that you're legitimately nourishing, you know, the youngest and most vulnerable students in your community. And we call this last point added value because there really can be nothing more inspiring to a young person who might not know anything about agriculture than to have the opportunity to actually know the person that is growing their food. So you really you know, have that opportunity to inspire students as well and encourage them to possibly go down the same path that you did. All right. I always like to bring up how there are common links when you're reaching out to your new market, which are the
Tegan, are you back? We unmute.
back.
Okay.
Yes. Where did you hear me leave off?
Like at right after you were talking. You've got through all the added value slide, I think.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen again. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, great. All right, phew, that was, it's like everything went black. All right, so I always like to bring this slide up essentially because I think it's really important if you're not familiar with approaching food service directors. And I think in just my work and working with schools and food service and also working with farmers, I started to see some commonalities in the profession. So you're both feeding people and you're both feeding people in your community. And I think that's a really strong link. And I think it takes, you know, a certain type of individual to decide that's really what they want to dedicate their life to do. They both tend to be really based and rooted in your communities. Most food service personnel, you know, tend to be either they're full-time if they're food service directors, or they're part-time, but they tend to live right there and their students go to those schools and they're really invested in what happens in that place. You both definitely can work long hours and your work can be undervalued. And I also have found, and again, I know these can be broader stereotypes, but I found them as sort of positive commonalities. You're interested in nourishing your communities. So I think there are a lot of connections there, and it's just sort of another layer into why, you know, farm to school can really make sense. All right. All right, so who is the school food service customer? I know that this webinar is a national webinar, and essentially the school food service customer is varied as our communities, right? We have rural schools and urban schools. We have schools that are big. We have schools that are small. We have well-funded operations and we have underfunded operations, and there's trained staff and untrained staff. And maybe most importantly, you have food service personnel who absolutely love farm to school, and you have some who have never heard of it before. So I wish that I had something more specific to share with you, but the good news is that really learning about your food service operation is really learning about the community where you're based. You know, it's kind of goes hand in hand with that. Okay. So this is a little bit about the structure, and again, we are getting into some language here, but I do think that it's helpful because you'll probably see these acronyms. So the School Food Authority, we also call the SFA, and that is the governing body that houses the child nutrition program. So it often is a district. Sometimes there are multiple SFAs inside of a district. This is getting a little bit detailed, but essentially it's important to know because the SFA is the governing organization or body that's responsible for the flow of funds. So there can be one or multiple SFAs inside of a district. For example, charter schools often choose to be their own SFAs, but the larger district where that charter school is based will be a separate SFA from those charter schools. Sometimes they're integrated and sometimes they're separate. The food service director is the administrator. Sometimes they're managing, you know, a multi-million-dollar operation, and sometimes the food service director is also the menu planner, is also the dietitian, is also the person doing all of the allergy work if you're working with a more rural or even a suburban district. And then, of course, there's the team. You have your cooks, your kitchen management, your truck drivers, and others there as well. The students, I think when you talk to a food service director, they will ultimately say that the customer is really the students, and whether or not the students like, quote unquote, something is going to determine a lot. And I also just wanted to mention, because, and some of you might be familiar with this, but there are some food service operations that are self-operating, which means they're housed inside of the district, they're district staff, they have complete control of the funds, and everything happens in-house. And some districts decide to contract out with the food service management company, such as like Sodexo or Aramark. There are hundreds of food service management companies across the nation. Those are just, you know, and in that case, the SFA has a contract with the food service management company. And I'm noting that because I think that often there can be a perception or a myth that if there's a food service management company, it can be something where the district doesn't have any control over that and they just have their purchasing and they're just going to do that and they can't buy local, or sometimes the approach can go, sometimes you might think like, oh, I can only approach Sodexo or the food service management company, and if they don't respond. And I just want to make clear that the SFA holds the contract with the food service management company, and they have the ability on an annual basis to revise that contract. So you can always go to the SFA if you're trying to market yourself or want to enter into some kind of arrangement there to sell your products. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a district wouldn't do a farm to school program just because there's a food service management company there. In fact, a lot of them do house food service management companies. Jenna, was there a question that came up?
Yeah, it seems like it may have been breaking up a little bit when you were talking about what makes a farm to school program and all the different components of what a farm to school program could look like. Is it possible to just go back to that slide quickly, and just kind of re-clarify?
Could you just ask the question? Because I think I could just answer it if,
yeah,
was that the question?
Basically, I mean, I could answer as well, but basically when you were describing about a farm to school program and kind of what that looks like, just talking about how farm to school is really comprehensive. It's not just getting the meal onto the trays, but it can be farm field trips. It can be in-class taste testing.
Sure.
It can be a school garden lesson. So it can be all of that. So when we talk about farm to school and what a farm to school program looks like, we're just basically saying that it could be any and all of that.
Yeah. So what Jenna said, but I'll just repeat what I said in case someone didn't hear it. So generally, a farm to school activity could be a school garden, it could be a farm field trip, it could be a farmer in the classroom, any kind of experiential ag and nutrition education component. And then that's kind of considered in like an activities bucket. Or experiential education bucket. And then the other bucket is the local food served in the child nutrition program. And when you combine both of those activities, you have a complete farm to school program. Generally, we see schools starting with one or the other. They either start with procurement or they start with some level of school garden or other educational activity, and then they work their way to the other side till they come to a complete farm to school program. So, okay. Thanks. I'll just move forward here. Seems to be a little delay. Okay, so what do you need to know about the food service customer? I think I made this point, but essentially that schools can buy local food. Any school that participates in a child nutrition program can buy local food, and I'm only saying that participates in child nutrition program because those are the schools that we work with, but really any school can. So how can farmers sell to school food services? This is why you called in, and we are finally getting there. I think to start this conversation, it's helpful to think back to the slide where I shared what the reimbursement rate was, which plus or minus 6 cents is around $3.29 per meal. So what I didn't note there is that reimbursement rate covers the food. It also covers labor. It covers equipment. It covers everything related to running the program. And so generally, and this varies, it's anywhere, from $1 to $1.70, and just depends on sort of the status of the economics of how that program's running. There's around $1 just to spend on food, like minus the prep work, around like 70%. And then there's also essentially a commodities reimbursement, right? So this is a portion of your total reimbursement amount that districts are deciding to put aside so that they can purchase commodity foods that are offered by the USDA, including DoD Fresh. And I'm trying to explain this as simply as possible because we can go down some holes here. So DoD does stand for Department of Defense. but it doesn't really have anything to do with Department of Defense, besides that they help us to facilitate distributor agreements to distribute fresh fruits and vegetables to the schools. And we could probably do a whole other webinar on that, but essentially it's not dollars. This isn't the USDA Foods and DoD fresh money, isn't money that actually ends up at the schools. It's money that they allocate to purchase these other products that they know are coming from our food distribution department. So when we're talking about farm to school and selling to schools, we're talking about that cash reimbursement piece. That's the cash that schools have to purchase direct foods. That doesn't include their USDA foods or their DoD fresh deliveries. And there are ways that farmers can and do sell to DoD fresh, and I will touch on that in a little bit. All right. Okay. I think we covered that. So product sales to schools. Here are really all of the different ways that farmers can sell to schools. We do have USDA foods on there because they are farms that are selling to schools. They tend to be very large because they do have to cover a large quantity of food. So this presentation, we're really focusing on direct sales, selling to third-party distributors, as well as selling to food service management companies. Okay. So what might buying local look like, right? We definitely have direct sales, and there are benefits to direct sales, and we will get into some of those. And then there also are indirect sales. This as a school, this is actually one of our grantees that has a significant school garden. It's more like a school farm. It is about 2 acres, but absolutely, so they really consider themselves more of a school farm, and I thought I would include it here. So essentially, cafeterias absolutely can purchase directly from a school garden. They have a full greenhouse setup here. That's a picture down there. Yes, they do have a tractor. They have a full ag and FFA program, so they're pretty lucky with everything that they have there. Things are delivered right to the cafeteria, and they serve those products on the cafeteria line. They do pay the program, which is the point I want to make here, a fair market rate for those products. And I think last year, it was a significant amount last year for a school farm, a school garden. It was around, I don't want to screw up the number, so I want to say it was like 3,000 pounds, something like that. So for a program that's run by ag students, it was pretty significant. And then definitely farmers can sell directly to schools. And this is a farmer. This is not his product, but this is a farmer, David Marvel, who's delivering broccoli and cauliflower. And essentially some of those direct benefits are there's the possibility of having increased profit. You have that direct relationship and connection to the school. You can kind of touch on all of those sort of community building aspects that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes things can be simplified because you are dealing directly with them. But obviously there are some challenges too, right? You have to be able to distribute. You have to be able to bring things to schools. And some districts don't have a central kitchen. They have multiple kitchens. And if you can spend an entire day having to drive around to sell to those schools. So that's something that would just have to be balanced out when you're kind of looking financially if that makes sense for you or not to do that. And if you know that doesn't make sense, and again, I've had some growers decide this is the best decision for them because they're able to sell, tends to be larger amount of their product as well on a more regular schedule. Some farmers decide to join cooperatives or hubs to consolidate. This is a great option, particularly if you know that you are near a larger district or you have a relatively small farm, to team up with some other farmers and one of them decides to be the distributor. This is happening pretty successfully in West Virginia right now, where they have pretty small farms and the demand way outweighs the supply, and the Department of Education there has been helping to coordinate growers so that they can meet the demand. There's a huge demand for local products at their schools there. And then through a distributor, obviously. So the downside is you might not get as much profit You are dealing with a third party. The arrangement to sell to them might be more irregular if they're kind of, just waiting for the school, or they're working with multiple farmers. They might not always buy from you. The upsides are generally with distributors, you do get paid faster with the school. With the school, you're looking generally at a longer time period, generally around 60 days. That can be shorter or slightly longer. Distributors distribute, so that makes it a lot easier. Okay, and I did want to briefly touch on because I did bring it up. So there definitely are ways that farmers are selling to the DoD Fresh program and USDA foods, and certain states are really making this happen, facilitating this in certain ways. And Vermont is a really great example of that. So there is an employee at the Department of Education in Vermont, in child nutrition programs there, who really works to make sure that their USDA foods vendors are coming from a regional area. So they really work in collaboration, and they also work with their DoD Fresh vendors to make sure that they're buying from local farmers, so that when schools are using their DoD Fresh entitlement funds, they have options that are local and that are regional. So as you can see on this list, in their USDA foods, while they're not all inside of the state of Vermont, they are relatively regional. From Maine, they're most regional and the most local products are. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. I'm sorry I'm breaking up. It says that I have full connection. So, okay. So this, just moving a little bit on from selling directly to schools, it might not be something that you think that you're ready to do, or you might be, fully maxed out at farmers markets. You don't really have the capacity or the extra sell, and you're doing great at farmers markets. And that, if that makes sense for you, there are other ways to connect with farm to skyrocketed in recent years. And I think the shift has been where before, when schools were going on farm visits, it was a little bit of like maze. And now what I'm really seeing is that schools, and in a large part, I think the farm to school programs, they really want to go to a farm where they actually do things that farmers do. So planting and weeding and watering and learning about, the life cycle of insects. So am I breaking up? I keep getting messages that I'm breaking up. Can you hear me now? Okay. So also, farmer in the classroom visits are another way. Like sometimes schools can't go to farms just because the buses are too expensive, or they have a really big school, and there are districts that are deciding that having farmers come into the classroom is more cost effective for them. It also can be something that you can do in the winter time to talk about what a farmer does in the winter to prepare for the upcoming season. October, though I know it tends to be pretty busy, at least in my region for farmers, it is National Farm to School Month, and farmer in the visit classrooms are in really high demand there. That is definitely something that schools can and will pay for. So a teacher and staff CSA, we are seeing those become more popular as well. And it can be a great way to kind of get your foot in the door and figure out if delivering to the school is going to make sense for you. And that also should have parent on there. So parent, teacher, staff, CSA. I recommend that you offer that to your school community, because if you do have a CSA there, adding on some products to the cafeteria can make a lot of sense. Farm raisers, this is an idea. There is an entire guide out of California about how to hold a farm raiser. Essentially, farm raisers are a fundraising idea where seeds and plants are used instead of selling sweets and treats. And schools are definitely looking for fundraisers that don't involve food on a more and more regular basis. So it's something that you could approach the school with. School gardens / farms. I do know some farmers that have been hired as a consultant basis to consult in developing the school garden, or you might just want to make it something that you do to connect with your community and volunteer, you know, your time once or twice as you're starting to build those relationships to consult with design or maybe consult about a pest issue. We know that our census said that there are 7,000 gardens, but that is a really underreporting of school gardens in the nation. So we know that there are many, many more, and more being developed every day. So these are just some ideas. If you know that direct sales are not right for you to the cafeteria, there are other ways to not only sell your product to the schools, but also to connect with schools in terms of just being invested in your community and farm to school programs. All right, so here are just a few stories. There's just 2 here that I wanted to share, and Jenna will be sharing more in her webinar. But essentially, here's a successful small farm operation, 14-acre vegetable CSA in Minnesota, and obviously their primary source of income is their CSA, but they decided that they were going to work with Minneapolis public schools, and they ended up getting a contract for 27,000 pounds of carrots per school year. So a pretty successful operation that helped to support their CSA during the off season, obviously carrots being a storage crop. Okay, and we'll just move here. This is David Sowers. I don't know if any of you on this know him or not. He is with Page County Grown in Page County, Virginia. He started, there's actually a great little video about him that Cooperative Extension put out during his first project. He started selling to Page County Schools, which is a relatively rural school district, and 2 other school districts there. And through that, got connected to DC Central Kitchen, which now has hired him as a major supplier. And it went from these like small sales here and there to a much larger contract, and they are buying from him. This is actually last year's number, the $46,000. So I do know that that is increased, and it really has become a much larger portion of his business than he ever anticipated. And he sells them everything from butternut squash to cauliflower, which aren't always the things that everyone thinks that schools will want, but it works really well because of DC Central Kitchen that works as a food service management company. So this is really an example of a farmer selling to a food service management company, where the previous example was a farmer selling directly to a school district and entering a contract with that school district. Okay, I think we're gonna skip this poll just for the sake of time. And I just wanted to put this screen up because we do hear this a lot, that there is a myth out there that schools can't buy foods because the USDA has all these regulations around food safety, and they're just, you know, stopping everyone from buying local food. And that's a myth that I want to bust. So the USDA does not have any rules prohibiting local products. In fact, it's really served it really serves as a best practice, and is mentioned in all of our communications and literature as a best practice, is sourcing locally. Additionally, schools determine their own food safety standards for their vendors. So it's nothing that the USDA has said that schools need to do. Obviously, there are suggestions around best practices, and we do have examples of checklists that we share when schools request them, or when districts request them, of types of questions to ask farmers around food safety, but they're very basic things. There's nothing overly rigorous in there. It's, you know, making sure that people wash their hands and there's a safe water source, and there's no level of inspection that goes on really for any of the food. That is all decided by the district. And we do try to make the point that there's nothing inherently more food unsafe than local produce, than produce coming from any other source. So we hear that a lot, and it's just a myth that's out there. Okay, so I think that I touched on most of this there. I did just want to put this up here because districts sometimes will, sometimes will, and other vendors, especially if they're institutional, they generally have standards for that, and they shouldn't be outrageous. And if they are outrageous, it's kind of a time to ask more questions. They also might ask for a sales history, and this is part of a district procurement process, essentially just making sure that you actually deliver product and you haven't had any problems. Again, it shouldn't be anything that is too rigorous, just asking for recommendation for a referral is really what that is. If they're asking for a sales history, that's what they're looking for. Want to reiterate that GAP is not a USDA requirement, although districts can decide that's what they want to ask for. We always say that there are other options of ensuring food safety or asking about food safety practices that are just as adequate as that. All right. So I just want to leave you here with a few next steps of things that you can do to take small steps. So let me go back to that slide. So offering samples is always recommended, just like it is with any other client. You know, you really can't sell yourself any better than bringing some of your awesome product, you know, to a school, or calling up a school and asking for a visit and bringing some product. So definitely highly recommended. Before you do that, I would check out the menu. Often you will be introducing new products in the menu, so don't feel like if you don't see anything that you grow on the menu that you can't approach that school. Just for example, if there's any level of lettuce on the menu, bring any level of green for the district to try out. Or if there's any level of orange vegetable, which there should be, bring any level of orange vegetable that you serve. Something like that, just to kind of get an idea of what the capacity of the school is, because you don't know what kind of kitchen that they're working with. Some schools have full kitchens, some schools just have a heat and serve oven. I have seen schools that just have a heat and serve oven also have a full salad bar, and they're doing prep because they have a 3-compartment sink. So just because a school doesn't have, you know, a beautiful big kitchen doesn't mean that they also can't participate in farm to school and can't buy things locally. When you're coming for that visit, always provide a product list, making sure, because don't assume they're going to know just because, you know, it might seem obvious to you that if you have one type of lettuce, you'll probably have another. Bring a full product list with you. Offer to come and eat lunch at the school. It's a great way to start that relationship. Always start talking in the winter. It works well for you, but you want that time to plan with the district as well, knowing that it's going to take some time before you can offer your products or they can try things out, and that we know that farmers generally like time to plan, and so do districts. Always invite them for a farm visit if you're comfortable with that. And of course, start small, just with 1 or 2 products. And this is a process, just like any new market or any new relationships, it's going to take some working out. So don't get discouraged, and just take one of these, you know, small steps. And these are really steps for success. All right, so our next webinar is March 15th. We were told it was sold out, but I'm gonna let Kara share with everyone, because it seems like a few people didn't come on to this one, so I don't wanna discourage anyone. It is going to dive into even more detail about how to reach out to districts. And a little bit more of the business of farm to school. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jenna to talk about our Farm to School grant program. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tegan. So we're going a little bit over, but we definitely know that a lot of you are here because you want to learn more about our Farm to School grant program. And we're just going to give you some updates about that. And as Tegan said, we're going to dive into some of these details a little bit more at the next webinar. All right, looks like it is loaded there. So since the inception of our grant program in 2013, we have awarded over $25 million in funding to approximately 365 grantees. Our program has really had a far reach, and we provide farm to school support to over 30,000 schools, or nearly 30,000 schools, 13 million students, and spans across all 50 states. It's a fairly competitive grant program, and we award grants to approximately 1 in 5 schools. So it's really important to read the RFA completely make sure you comply as you're writing the grant application to all the questions that we requested you include in the proposal. And here, again, we just want to make it very clear that funding through our Farm to School grant program is available for small and medium-sized agricultural producers or groups of small and medium-sized agricultural producers. Agricultural producers and farmers like yourselves are also eligible to apply with other entities that are eligible for programs such as school districts, state and local agencies, tribal organizations, and nonprofit partners. So you could be the lead as a farmer, or you can again be kind of a contractor or a partner on one of those applications and proposals. And we do announce the grant award the grant RFA goes out and is made available every fall of each year. We also, since we're running a long time, we can't give too much information about this, but we wanted to provide some examples of some additional grants and loans that would be available to you at our USDA agencies. So we have this chart here on the screen is available on our website, which I did provide you to link check earlier. But in addition to our Farm to School grant program, you can also apply through different various funding streams as well. And like I mentioned, this is available on our website, along with many other fact sheets. And we can make sure to touch on the grant program a bit more in the next webinar. And if you go onto our website, you can see tons of information about how to apply. You can look at past awarded grants, and there's lots of information there. And of course, the regional leads are always a great resource. Next slide. So here again is the link to our website, so you can find out more information. We also have The Dirt. It's our bi-weekly newsletter, which will definitely give you really awesome model examples. We highlight different grantees. We also always provide different opportunities for the grant program and give you that announcement, so make sure that you know exactly when our grant RFA is available, and you can start listening on those webinars and also stay up to date on any new resources we provide too. We also have tons of fact sheets, like I mentioned, that are on our website as well. We mentioned that local meat can be used in schools, so this is one of those fact sheets that shows you how that actually happens, what are those kind of federal or state inspection processes you would have to go through to make sure it is safe or to be used in the school district. So like I said, lots of additional resources on our website, along with other webinars that we've done in the past. And even just kind of simple fact sheets like this that kind of get geared towards producers and farmers on how to go through those steps to sell to schools. And that's really what we'll be covering in the next webinar. So it's kind of like, okay, how do you start that conversation? How do you understand all the procurement regulations that schools face? So now at this point, you kind of have a nice overview of what Farm to School means, why it's kind of worth that extra effort. And the next webinar will really focus on how to kind of dig deeper, how to start that conversation, understanding pack sizes, seasonality, when to start planning, and like we mentioned before, really incorporating all this into your business plan. So I think that's all we have today. Again, we can open it up to some questions if you want to stay on the line, or you can send us a chat in the chat box, and we can make sure to try and cover it at our next webinar. All right, so I'm not seeing any messages come to the chat, but we'll give it another moment. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is really exciting for us, and we're excited to continue to give direct technical assistance to all of you. Feel free to reach out to us anytime. Our contact information is on our website, which again, I did share that in the chat box. You can reach out to any of us, and we're always available to speak with you, and we'd love to hear more.
Thanks.
So again, I'm still not seeing anything in the chat.
Oh, hold on, Kara, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh.
No, I think thank you guys all. I don't see anybody else asking questions, but thank you to both of you and to all of you guys who attended here today. I do encourage you to sign up for the next webinar, and the recording for this we will email to you probably within the week.